Hello guys, I'm Tom, and today we'll explore what trolls are. One of the most awe-inspiring beings to have emerged from contemporary horror and science fiction cinema does not come from the traditional corners of Hollywood, but from the icy and mysterious landscapes of Northern Europe. We're talking about trolls. These colossal creatures, halfway between the ancient and the monstrous, are not simple beasts from a children's tale, but mythological entities that have been reimagined with surprising harshness and overwhelming symbolic weight. And it is precisely in Troll Hunter, that unexpected gem of Norwegian cinema, directed by the visionary André Øvredal, where these legendary figures come to life anew, wrapped in brutal realism and a narrative that chills as much as it fascinates. The movie begins almost like a game, with an atmosphere reminiscent of classic found-footage films. A group of young amateur filmmakers, armed only with their cameras and a restless curiosity, embarks on an investigation that apparently revolves around bear attacks in the most remote and wild areas of Norway. Nothing extraordinary, until the pieces start to not fit. The marks, the tracks, the violence of the attacks. Nothing matches what a bear would do. What seemed like a simple documentary expedition turns into a chilling journey toward a truth that has remained buried for centuries, camouflaged among legends and protected by a silent government conspiracy. It is then that the veil of logic falls, and the irrational takes over. At the heart of this discovery lies a monumental revelation. Trolls exist, and they are not mere old fables, but living species with organs, territorial behavior, eating habits, and even susceptibility to diseases. The film unfolds like a classified document to which we finally have access, and what we find inside is nothing short of disturbing. In this video, we will dive into that universe where the mythical meets the biological. We will examine trolls not as fantasy figures, but as real organisms that, according to the internal logic of the movie, have been studied, monitored, and contained by a network of silent hunters and bureaucrats determined to keep their existence secret. We will see how Øvredal manages to merge Scandinavian folklore with scientific elements, creating a modern reinterpretation that makes these monsters part of the very fabric of Norwegian nature. Troll Hunter presents us with an impressive gallery of these creatures. They are not a single species, but a diverse family of titans, from the stealthy forest trolls to the mountainous giants that seem to belong to another geological era, each with its peculiarities. The multi-headed tosserlad, the aggressive Ringlefinch, medium-sized but deadly, the colossal Dovregubben, which seem to have come straight from Viking ancestors' tales, and the mythical Jotnar, whose very presence seems to warp the air around them. What's impressive about this concept is that everything is presented with such a coherent internal logic, so detailed, that at times we forget we are watching fiction. These creatures are not mere predators. Their diet, for example, includes minerals, stones, and dense vegetation, which points to a digestive system unlike ours. They behave more like forces of nature than wild animals. Their strength is such that a single movement can topple trees, crush vehicles, and obliterate any living being in their path. However, they do not deliberately seek conflict with humans. On the contrary, in their natural state, they tend to avoid contact, feeding in remote areas, far from any sign of civilization. But then a variable arises that changes everything: disease. Instead of attributing their aggressive behavior to simple intrinsic malice, the film introduces a fascinating and chilling hypothesis. Many of these trolls could be infected with a primitive and violent form of rabies. This condition completely alters their physiology and behavior, making them unpredictable, dangerous, and even self-destructive. And here comes one of the film's most iconic characters, Hans, the Troll Hunter, a man weathered by years solitary, resigned, with a mission not seeking glory, but balance. Hans does not use magical weapons or ancient spells. His main tool is ultraviolet light, used with surgical precision. But this is not just a spectacular invention. Within the film's universe, we are given a scientific explanation as brutal as it is convincing. Troll bones contain a massive amount of calcium, making them susceptible to ultraviolet radiation. When exposed to a high dose of this light, their bone structures crystallize explosively, triggering a reaction that turns them to stone. No metaphors, no fantasy, just science applied to the impossible. But not all trolls react the same way. Younger specimens, for example, have a vitamin D deficiency. Their bodies, unable to synthesize it properly, start generating lethal amounts of internal gases. In these cases, the result is not petrification but explosion. A grotesque implosion. A biological blast as graphic as it is unforgettable. On the other hand, older trolls die slowly, hardening from the inside in a process that feels less like an end and more like a curse of stone. Troll Hunter also resurrects some of the darkest legends of Nordic folklore. It is mentioned, for example, that trolls can smell Christian blood, a detail that refers to their millennial resentment toward the human cultures that invaded their domains. Church bells, symbols of civilizational progress, are unbearable to them, causing sharp pain that repels them from urbanized areas. This friction between the sacred and the wild, between the human and the monstrous, not only enriches the narrative, but gives it a subtle yet powerful political and cultural background. And among all these beings, one stands out in particular, the Tosser Lad, also known as the three-headed troll. Its imposing silhouette rises above the forest, and its mere presence seems to alter the gravity of the environment. But the most intriguing thing is not its size, but its biology. Although it has 3 heads, only one is functional. The other 2 are hollow structures, almost symbolic. According to Hans, these extra heads are not vital organs, but products of adaptive evolution. They could serve as intimidation tools, dominant signals, or even sexual attributes to attract mates. They are not born with them. They develop over time, as if the troll's own body understood that in a world where only the most terrifying survive, even physical design can be a weapon. In the wild and mind-blowing world that Troll Hunter presents to us, we venture into a fascinating territory where the line between myth and reality blurs almost to the point of disappearing. In this universe, as vast as it is terrifying, we discover that some of these legendary creatures possess the ability to develop up to 9 heads, a number that seems taken from a medieval nightmare or a forgotten mythology. However, on screen, we only get to see a version with 3 heads, and even so, its mere presence is enough to freeze our blood. It needs nothing more to leave an indelible impression and engrave itself in our memory with the force of an ancestral symbol. But the diversity of trolls the movie presents goes far beyond simple monstrous forms. Among the most peculiar variants is the Ringlefinch, a type of troll that breaks all expectations related to size. Just a little taller than Hans himself, the taciturn hunter and antihero who guides the plot. This being proves that terror does not always need giants to be effective. Although it doesn't get as much screen time as some of its brethren, the little we see makes it clear that it is fierce, unpredictable, and lethal. Its teeth, sharp as blades, are designed to tear flesh with an almost clinical brutality. In one of the film's tensest confrontations, Hans must don special armor to survive its charge, emphasizing the real danger this creature represents. A disturbing detail revealed about this species is its physiological reaction to stress or illness. They suffer from urinary incontinence. An apparently trivial characteristic, yes, but one that adds an extra layer of unsettling realism to their already strange biology, reminding us that these beasts are not invulnerable titans, but beings with grotesque and natural vulnerabilities. On the other hand, we have the imposing Dovregubben, known in tradition as the King of the Mountain. Its name evokes nobility and ancestral power, but the reality we see on screen is much cruder and more earthly. A being covered in dense, coarse, brownish fur reminiscent of a wild primate, a creature of brute strength, but also rudimentary intelligence. Despite its aggressiveness and defiant attitude, the Dovregubben is one of the smaller species within the spectrum of trolls the movie unfolds. It prefers to take refuge in deep, shadowy caves, places where daylight barely ventures, as if darkness were its sanctuary, its impregnable fortress against the human world. Its presence reminds us that these monsters not only inhabit the surface, but also hide in the very bowels of the earth, in unexplored and forgotten territories. Now, if there is one figure that completely dominates the visual and thematic imagination of the film, it is the Jotun, or Jotun, the absolute titan, the creature that turns any setting into a mere backdrop for its colossal magnitude. With its imposing 61-meter height, this giant, inspired directly by the ancient frost giants of Norse mythology, transcends the physical to become an elemental force of nature. It is a living reminder that there are forces buried in the mountains that should never be disturbed, primordial beings that challenge our understanding and human arrogance. The film reveals that the mere presence of the Jotun causes a kind of exodus among the other trolls, who, despite their ferocity, are incapable of coexisting with such colossal power. To keep it away from civilization and avoid disaster, special light barriers have been installed, genuine invisible fences of ultraviolet light that act as containment, but only for now. This colossus becomes the most formidable antagonist of the film, a threat so brutal that merely mentioning its name changes the tone of the entire narrative. The Jotun does not speak, reason, or negotiate. It simply exists, an absolute manifestation of primal force, a presence that carries with it a silent and terrifying warning. In this cinematic ecosystem, trolls are presented as primitive but deeply sensory beings, guided by wild instincts and immense brute strength, as well as possessing a disconcerting ability to detect the scent of Christian blood, a trait that drives them into an almost ritualistic frenzy, evoking ancient tensions between humans and monsters, between civilization and untamed nature. Behind this bold and novel reinterpretation of the myth stands Norwegian filmmaker André Ove Riedel, a director who not only built a movie, but paid homage to the stories that shaped him since childhood. Years later, Ove Riedel would direct the underrated Dracula, The Dark Prince, and collaborate with Guillermo del Toro on Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, 2019, consolidating his distinctive voice within contemporary fantasy genre. For Ove Riedel, trolls are not simply monsters born from folklore. They are part of Norway's cultural DNA. His childhood was marked by the tales his parents and grandparents read to him, stories from an old family collection, where trolls were eternal protagonists. Some were tiny as children, others as large as entire mountains, but all shared essential traits: superhuman strength, limited intelligence, and those huge noses that seemed to search for something invisible to the human eye. Those ancestral images marked him forever and shaped his imagination. As an adult, trained at the prestigious Brooks Institute of Film in California, Ove Riedel began his career with short films like Student Murder, but his true ambition was to tell a story that spoke of his roots and the monsters inhabiting the psyche of his homeland. The challenge was immense: to make a monster movie on a tight budget. His solution was brilliant. Inspired by classics like Jaws and Jurassic Park, he opted for a mockumentary format. This allowed him to combine everyday realism with the wildest fantasy without relying on costly special effects. After multiple script revisions, he found the perfect formula: a group of students investigating deaths initially attributed to bears, who gradually uncover an unimaginable truth. Trolls are real, and Hans, that lonely and gray man, is the only one maintaining the delicate balance. No one acknowledges or celebrates him, but without him, everything would collapse. The film received financial support thanks to a state grant promoting Norwegian cinema and was shot in just 6 weeks in some of the country's most inhospitable and majestic landscapes. For the design of each creature, Ove Riedel turned to classic Norwegian folk art, avoiding Hollywood cliches. Each troll was conceived to be unique, with its own visual language, as if belonging to a distinct yet plausible evolutionary line. Thus was born Troll Hunter, a work that not only honors Nordic legends, but reinvents them boldly, blending mythology, science fiction, and a powerful visual narrative. They are not mere monsters. They are echoes of a deep past, symbols of a nature that was never fully tamed, and that, if we are not careful, could reclaim what was once theirs.